From the outside, the Paet family looked like the picture of stability. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Florida, where Nathan Paet served as a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force. Nathan was a man of discipline, hard work, and commitment, respected by his colleagues and admired as a loving father at home. He worked long hours, but he always tried to give his children his time and attention, because for him, family was everything. Neighbors would see Nathan coming home in uniform, tired but smiling, and they admired the couple. To many, Nathan and his wife Michelle looked like a young family chasing the American dream. But what nobody could see from the outside was the growing storm inside that home. Michelle Paet wasn't happy. She saw her husband's devotion not as love, but as a burden. The sacrifices of military life, the stress of finances, the constant responsibility, she hated it all. She wanted freedom, money, and excitement. She wanted more than what Nathan could give her. And instead of trying to repair her marriage, Michelle took a darker path. She began an affair. This new relationship gave her not only passion, but also a vision of a different life. A life without Nathan. In her mind, divorce wasn't enough. Divorce meant struggle, arguments, financial losses. She didn't want a separation. She wanted Nathan gone. And most dangerously of all, she saw a way to benefit from his death. Nathan had a life insurance policy through the military. If he were to die, Michelle would collect a large payout. In her mind, Nathan's life had become nothing more than a dollar sign standing between her and the freedom she wanted. At first, it might have been just a thought, a whisper in her head that she could have ignored. But Michelle didn't ignore it. She fed it. She began to talk openly with her lover about her plan. She told him about the insurance money, about how their future could be better if Nathan wasn't in the picture. What's most disturbing is how casual she was in those conversations, as if killing her husband was just another problem to solve. As the days passed, Michelle's obsession grew stronger. She began pulling other people into her plan, testing their loyalty, offering promises of money. For her, it wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It became a step-by-step plan. She wanted Nathan dead, and she wanted it done soon. All the while, Nathan remained completely unaware. He continued his work at the Air Force Base, trusted his wife, and tried to keep his family together. He had no idea that every moment he kissed his wife goodbye, every time he came home to her, she was already plotting his death. The cruelest part of this story is how normal everything must have felt for him. He was living his life, dedicated to his family, not knowing that his wife was orchestrating his murder from within their home. On December 1st, 2010, Michelle's plan came to life. Nathan finished his shift and returned home as usual. The night air was calm, the neighborhood quiet, and everything seemed ordinary. But lurking in the shadows was death. Nathan was ambushed outside his own home, shot multiple times before he could even react. The sound of gunfire shattered the stillness of the night, and Nathan collapsed just feet away from his door. Inside, Michelle pretended to be the concerned wife. She called for help, she cried in front of the neighbors, and when police arrived, she acted the role of a devastated spouse. But seasoned detectives can often sense when something doesn't add up. Her tears felt misplaced, her grief felt forced, and her story didn't quite fit the crime scene. For investigators, the first question was motive. Why would anyone want Nathan Paet dead? He wasn't in trouble, he had no enemies, and there was no sign of robbery. Nothing had been taken. His wallet, his belongings, all untouched. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was targeted. Someone had waited for him. Someone had known his routine. Someone wanted him dead. The detectives began piecing together Nathan's life. his relationships, and the people closest to him. And very quickly, suspicion started pointing inwards. Michelle's behavior during questioning was unusual. Instead of being consumed by grief, she seemed oddly calm at times. She spoke about her marriage in ways that felt detached. And when phone records were checked, the truth began to slip out. Michelle had been in constant contact with her lover, even in the hours leading up to Nathan's murder. Those calls, those texts, they told a story far darker than what she admitted to the police. Soon, the web of lies began to unravel. Friends and acquaintances came forward, telling investigators about Michelle's conversations, how she had spoken of wanting Nathan gone, how she had discussed money, how she had hinted at a plan. What had looked like a tragic attack on a hard-working airman now started to reveal itself as something much more chilling. A cold-blooded conspiracy orchestrated by the very woman who was supposed to love him the most. The community was stunned. People who thought they knew Michelle couldn't believe she was capable of such cruelty. But the deeper detectives dug, the clearer it became. Michelle Paet was not a grieving widow. She was the mastermind of Nathan's murder. And this was only the beginning. The investigation would soon uncover just how far Michelle had gone, how many people she had involved, and how greed and betrayal had led to one of the most shocking family crimes America had ever seen. When Nathan Paet's life ended in a sudden, violent moment outside his own home, the community was shocked. Neighbors who had admired the family now couldn't believe what had happened in their quiet street. Nathan had been a dedicated husband and father, serving his country faithfully. And suddenly, in a few seconds, he was gone. The police arrived quickly, but from the very beginning, it was clear that this wasn't a random attack. There were no signs of robbery, no struggle that suggested a spontaneous fight. Everything pointed to a planned ambush. Someone had waited for Nathan. Someone knew exactly when he would be home. At first, investigators spoke with Michelle. She played the part of the grieving wife perfectly. Tears, sorrow, and a trembling voice that should have broken hearts. But experienced detectives noticed the smallest inconsistencies, and Michelle's performance didn't convince them. Her grief was oddly controlled, her answers carefully measured, and there were moments when her reactions didn't match the reality of her husband lying dead outside the door. Something was off, and as they began looking closer, the evidence started pointing in one direction: inside the home. The breakthrough came with the discovery of Michelle's affair. Phone records, emails, and witness statements revealed a secret relationship that had been ongoing for months. The man she had been seeing wasn't just a casual fling, he was deeply involved in her plans, at least as a confidant. And when investigators dug into conversations, they found chilling details. Michelle hadn't just expressed dissatisfaction with her marriage. She had discussed Nathan's life insurance, the timing of the attack, and the steps she believed would secure the future she wanted. The casual way she had spoken about murder and financial gain was horrifying to everyone involved in the case. Friends who were pulled into the plan, either knowingly or unknowingly, began to talk under questioning. They revealed conversations where Michelle had promised them money, hinted at the problem Nathan posed, and described how easy it would be to remove him from the picture. One of the most disturbing things was how comfortable she seemed in discussing these plans, as if orchestrating someone's death were just another task on her to-do list. Her obsession with control, manipulation, and greed became evident with every story that emerged. Meanwhile, forensic evidence confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. The shooter had been waiting for Nathan, knowing his route, timing, and routine. There was no hesitation, no chaos. It was precise, It was planned. And it wasn't the work of an outsider who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was personal. As the investigation deepened, Michelle's calmness started to crack. Under pressure, small inconsistencies in her story began to emerge. She contradicted herself when recounting the timeline of the night, and her explanations for key details didn't add up. Every time detectives followed up with questions about her whereabouts or her conversations with friends and her lover, her answers grew more defensive, more strained. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. When the pieces came together, it was undeniable. Michelle had been the mastermind. She had carefully plotted Nathan's death, manipulated those around her, and orchestrated every detail of the crime. It wasn't a spontaneous act of anger or frustration. It was a calculated plan fueled by greed, lust, and a desire for freedom. She had chosen her path long before the shots were fired, and the people she had drawn into her scheme were mere instruments in her deadly plan. The community's reaction was one of disbelief and horror. People couldn't reconcile the Michelle they thought they knew. A neighbor, a mother, a wife, with the person revealed in the investigation. The betrayal cut deep because it was so personal. Nathan's death wasn't caused by an enemy or a stranger. It was caused by the person he trusted the most. That realization left a lingering fear and sadness throughout the neighborhood, shaking the sense of safety everyone had once taken for granted. As the case moved toward prosecution, the scope of Michelle's manipulation became clearer. Witnesses described her carefully coaching others, making promises, and painting a picture of an easy life after Nathan was gone. The prosecution portrayed her as cold, calculating, and entirely self-interested. She had seen her husband as an obstacle, and she had removed him in the most brutal way possible. Every testimony, every text message, and every call revealed how far she had gone to achieve her selfish goals. What added to the tragedy was the impact on the children. Too young to fully understand the complexity of what had happened, they suddenly lost their father in a violent, shocking way. And even worse, the truth about their mother's involvement would eventually reach them, leaving scars that would last a lifetime. Investigators and psychologists noted that the emotional damage caused by a parent orchestrating the death of another parent is profound, far beyond what anyone could recover from easily. Michelle's trial became a media sensation. Stories about her affair, the planning, and the cold nature of her actions dominated headlines. Experts discussed the case on news programs, analyzing her behavior, her motives, and the manipulation that had gone into orchestrating Nathan's murder. The public was horrified. How could someone plan the death of their spouse with such precision, involving others while maintaining the appearance of a normal, loving wife? In court, evidence piled up against her. Witnesses recounted her conversations, her manipulations, and the promises she had made. Messages between Michelle and her lover were presented, showing not only her desire for Nathan to die, but also her careful planning and calculated moves to make it happen. Even her demeanor during interrogations became part of the evidence. Calm, measured, and detached, unlike the anguish one would expect from a grieving spouse. The prosecution highlighted her greed, the betrayal of trust, and the premeditated nature of the crime. They argued that Michelle had transformed her family home into a crime scene, and her relationship into a deadly trap. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture: a woman who valued money and her own desires over life, loyalty, and love. By the time the trial progressed, the world had a clear understanding of what had happened. Michelle Paet was no longer seen as just a wife or mother. She was the central figure in a meticulously planned crime, a woman who had used others as tools, manipulated the people around her, and carried out a betrayal that would shock everyone who heard the story. And yet, even as the courtroom revealed the horrific details, there were questions that lingered. How had someone so seemingly normal developed such cold intentions? How could a woman so close to her family plan such a thing without showing any signs of remorse? These questions didn't have simple answers, and they reminded everyone that evil can sometimes hide in plain sight, even behind the most familiar faces. The story of the Paet family and Michelle's role in Nathan's death was more than just a crime. It was a lesson about trust, greed, and the darkness that can exist in relationships that appear perfect on the surface. The investigation uncovered the calculated betrayal, but it also revealed the human cost, the loss of life, the broken family, and the trauma left behind. As Part 2 closes, the focus shifts from the crime itself to the aftermath. The trial, the sentencing, and the way the story left a permanent mark on everyone involved. The final chapter would reveal the consequences for Michelle, the lingering grief of Nathan's children, and the cautionary tale that would remain etched in the minds of the community forever. When the case finally went to court, the shocking reality of the Paet family crime became public. Michelle Paet, once seen as just another wife and mother, was now facing the full weight of the law. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming amount of evidence. Her affair, her manipulations, the people she involved in the plot, and the premeditated plan to have her husband killed. The courtroom was tense, filled with reporters, neighbors, and the few remaining family members struggling to process the unimaginable betrayal. Every testimony painted the same chilling picture. Witnesses described conversations in which Michelle had spoken of wanting Nathan out of the way, of how she envisioned her life without him, and of the insurance payout she would receive. Text messages and phone records confirmed her role as the mastermind. It wasn't an act of passion or a moment of anger. It was a calculated scheme, meticulously planned to remove Nathan permanently. Even the shooter admitted to following the instructions that had come from Michelle, showing how deeply she orchestrated every step. For the prosecution, the challenge was to show not just that Nathan had been killed, but that Michelle had created the environment that allowed it to happen. Every promise of money, every manipulation of friends and lovers, every attempt to cover her tracks, all contributed to the narrative of her as a cold, calculating figure who placed her desires above the life of her husband. And the more the evidence mounted, the clearer it became that there was no innocent explanation for her actions. The defense tried to argue that Michelle had not directly committed the murder, that she had been pressured, or that her words had been exaggerated. They suggested she had never truly intended for Nathan to be killed. But the witnesses, messages, and evidence contradicted every claim. Her own involvement was undeniable. She had engineered the entire plan, manipulating others to carry out what she had conceived in her mind. Her intentions were clear, and the jury saw it. Throughout the trial, the focus wasn't just on Michelle. The court also examined the human cost of her actions. Nathan's children were left without a father, and the emotional toll on them was devastating. Friends and neighbors who had once trusted Michelle struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. How could someone so close, someone who was supposed to love and protect, plan the death of the man she married? The courtroom became more than a legal proceeding. It was a collective reckoning with the consequences of greed, obsession, and deceit. As the trial progressed, the evidence painted Michelle as someone who had long been driven by selfish desires. Her affair, her desire for money, her obsession with a life free from responsibility, it all pointed to a woman who valued herself over her family, over loyalty, over life itself. The jury listened to witness after witness, recounting her manipulations, her promises, and her attempts to cover up the truth. Every statement, every message, every carefully orchestrated detail revealed the extent of her betrayal. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Michel Paet was found guilty on multiple counts, including first-degree murder. The sentences reflected not only the crime itself, but the chilling premeditation that had gone into it. She was removed from the community, and justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But for Nathan's children, and for those who knew the family, the wounds would remain. No verdict, no amount of legal punishment could erase the pain of losing a husband and father at the hands of someone he trusted most. The media covered the story extensively, analyzing Michel's behavior and motives. Experts discussed the psychological elements at play, how jealousy, greed, and manipulation could drive someone to commit such an act, how betrayal within a family can be more devastating than any external threat, and how communities often fail to notice warning signs until tragedy strikes. The Paet case became an example cited in studies on domestic homicide and familial betrayal, a cautionary tale for those who underestimate the dark potential of human obsession. For Nathan's children, life after the trial was filled with loss and confusion. They had to grow up without a father, and their mother, once a figure of care and guidance, had become a symbol of betrayal. Psychologists involved in the case noted the long-term effects such trauma could have: trust issues, emotional scars, and the need for lifelong support. The family home, once a place of laughter and love, was now a memory of horror and grief. Neighbors and the local community also struggled to process the events. People who had once waved at Nathan as he left for work now wondered if they had really known the family at all. The quiet streets of the neighborhood were forever marked by the tragedy. Parents became more cautious, couples more vigilant about hidden tensions, and the story of the Paet family lingered as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Even years later, the case continues to be remembered not just for the crime itself, but for the lessons it carries. It shows how greed and selfishness can twist a person's mind, how betrayal can destroy the very foundation of a family, and how easily someone can be blindsided by those they trust most. The Paet family's tragedy is a story of ambition gone horribly wrong, of love turned into manipulation, and of a life ended far too soon. Michel's sentencing marked the final chapter in the legal story, but the human story remains ongoing. Nathan's children must continue their lives without him. The community carries the memory of the crime, and the cautionary tale of the Paet family serves as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the dangers that sometimes lurk within our closest relationships. In the end, the horrible case of the Paet family isn't just about murder. It's about betrayal, the consequences of unchecked desire, and the human cost of greed.